21 days after my son Daniel disappeared at sea, his wife held a funeral without a body. She took the MARINA and handed me his battered marine radio as if it were junk. That night, I switched it on. Daniel's voice came through the static Dad came. If they say the storm took me, follow beacon 4417. The coordinates ended at a lighthouse, abandoned for 12 years. I appreciate you settling in for this one. Before we begin, leave me a comment. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to find out they were hiding something? Yes or no? I'd love to know. Your words mean more to me than you realize. A few details in this story have been shaped for narrative purposes. The truth that matters is the lesson underneath. The coffin was empty. And across the aisle, the woman who put my son in it sat with fresh red nails and dry eyes. I knew it in my bones before I knew it in my head. 21 days since Everett vanished off the stern of his own yacht in a storm that the Coast Guard called unsurvivable. 21 days of search grids and cold water and official voices telling me to prepare for the worst. Now, here I sat, 67 years old, a retired port mechanic. My hands were so stained by engine grease that no amount of chapel soap would ever get them clean. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs in the front pew of a fog-wrapped Montauk chapel, while a minister spoke kind words over a box with nothing inside it. Vanessa Lockwood arrived 11 minutes late. My son's wife, 34. Walk up the center aisle in a tailored black coat, with her nails painted the color of arterial blood, and her face arranged in the precise expression of a woman who had rehearsed grief in a mirror. Not a single tear. Not one. She slid into the second row and leaned toward the man beside her. "Let's get this over with," she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. Dr. Preston Cole, 48, the Harbor District's chief medical examiner, stood behind her with his manicured hands folded in the posture of practiced sympathy. He was the one who had signed the presumptive death certificate. He was the one who had told me there was no point continuing the search. And now, he was the one standing close enough to Vanessa that their shoulders touched. I said nothing. I watched. The fog pressed against the chapel windows like something trying to get in. Afterward, we drove to the MARINA offices for the reading. Vanessa's attorney laid it out in language designed to sound neutral, and wasn't. Under a temporary power of attorney filed 72 hours after Everett's disappearance, Vanessa assumed full operational control of Caldwell Marina. The entire operation. $6 million in waterfront property, slip leases, fuel contracts, and equipment. Everything my son had built from the hull of my old repair shop, gone across a conference table in 14 minutes. My inheritance was a marine radio. Have you ever held something worthless in your hands and felt your entire life reduced to the weight of it? Vanessa dropped it on the table in front of me like tossing scraps to a dog. The metal casing hit the wood and the sound went through me like a nail driven into a coffin lid. "It's old and useless, just like you, Dad," she said. "Keep it as a souvenir." She didn't call me Arthur. She didn't call me Mr. Caldwell. She called me Dad, wearing the word like a borrowed coat she intended to return. I picked up the radio. I said nothing. Cole watched me from the doorway with his arms crossed, and something moved behind his eyes that I couldn't name yet, but would learn to recognize as fear. I drove back to my cottage on the point, a two-room boathouse with a tin roof and a view of the harbor that used to make me feel rich. That night, it just made me feel old. I set the radio on the kitchen table next to a cup of coffee that went cold before I remembered to drink it. The fog had followed me home. It sat against the windows and turned the harbor lights into ghosts. I don't know what time I stopped staring at the wall. I don't know when my hands unclenched, but I know exactly what time the radio came alive. 12:17 in the morning. The dial light turned green. By itself. No hand near it. No power source I could see. Just a sudden glow, like an eye opening in the dark. Static crackled through the speaker, thick and rolling like waves breaking over rocks. And then a voice cut through it, clear, steady. Impossible. Dad, if you're hearing this, don't trust what they told you about the storm. Follow Beacon 4417. Everett, my son's voice, speaking from a radio that shouldn't have been transmitting. 3 weeks after the ocean was supposed to have swallowed him whole, the static surged once more and died. The green dial faded back to black. My hands were shaking so hard the kitchen table rattled beneath them. The coffee cup slid 2 inches toward the edge, and I caught it without thinking. The way you catch things when your body is still working, but your mind has left the room. My son had been dead for 3 weeks. So whose voice had just told me not to trust the storm? I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around the radio, waiting for it to speak again. It didn't. The green dial stayed dark, the speaker stayed silent, and the fog outside my cottage windows thickened until the harbor lights disappeared entirely. But the voice was still in my head, playing on a loop that no amount of cold coffee could quiet. Everett never did anything without a reason. That was the thing people didn't understand about my son. They saw a man who ran a marina, who signed contracts and shook hands with investors. I saw the boy who once spent 3 Saturdays rebuilding a carburetor because the idle was off by 40 RPM. A boy who torqued every bolt to spec, who filed every receipt, who never left a tool out of place. If he had programmed a message into that radio and timed it to activate 21 days after he disappeared, then every word was chosen and every number was deliberate. Beacon 4417. Not a distress call, not a cry for help, a coordinate, a breadcrumb dropped by a man who had planned whatever happened to him long before the storm arrived. Vanessa had called this radio old and useless. She was half right. It was old. Grief is a tide. It pulls you under so slowly that by the time you realize you're drowning, the shore is already gone. I had been sinking for 3 weeks through the search, the memorial, the reading of documents that stripped my family's name off a property I'd spent 40 years building. But sitting at that table in the dark, listening to the clock on the wall tick past 3 in the morning, I felt something shift beneath the grief, something harder, something with edges. I got up and walked to my workbench. The nautical chart was still pinned above it, the same one I'd used for 30 years, creased and stained with engine grease at the fold lines. I ran my finger along the coastal frequency index until I found it. Beacon 4417, a decommissioned maritime signal tied to a set of coordinates 2.6 nautical miles east of the harbor mouth. I cross-referenced the position against the shoreline markings. Montauk Point Lighthouse. The keeper's quarters. I stared at the chart for a long time. The lighthouse had been shuttered for 12 years. No electricity, no maintenance, no reason for anyone to be there. The Coast Guard had decommissioned the signal beacon in 2011, and the building had been locked ever since. 12 years of salt wind and empty rooms. So why had Everett pointed me there? Because someone wanted a place nobody would look. I said it aloud, to no one, and the sound of my own voice in the empty cottage made the walls feel closer. I folded the chart and slid it into my jacket pocket. I set the radio on top of it. Then I pulled the tarp off the skiff. Would you have gone alone at 67? Into fog so thick you couldn't see your own bow, I stood on the dock in the gray half-light of an October dawn and asked myself that question honestly. My knees ached. My hands smelled like engine grease and cold metal. I had not told a single person where I was going, because there was no one left to tell. Lorraine was 3 years gone. Everett was 21 days gone. Rosa hadn't spoken to me since the reading. I untied the bowline and stepped into the skiff. The engine coughed twice before it caught a sound I'd been hearing for 20 years, as familiar as my own breathing. I eased the throttle forward, and the hull slid away from the dock, cutting a line through water so flat and gray it looked like poured concrete. The harbor fell behind me in pieces. First the fuel dock, then the marina office lights, then the breakwater pylons. By the time I passed the channel markers, everything behind me had dissolved into fog. The last time I'd taken this skiff past the breakwater, Everett had been sitting beside me. Now the passenger seat held nothing but a dead man's radio and a 67-year-old's stubbornness. Salt spray hit my lips. The outboard vibrated through the throttle grip and up into my wrist. Ahead was nothing but gray water, stretching into gray sky with no line between them. Then the fog shifted. The dark shape of the Montauk Point Lighthouse rose from the water like a gravestone. And through the mist, high in the keeper's quarters where no light had burned for 12 years, a faint glow pulsed once, twice, and held steady. Someone was inside. I cut the engine 30 yards from the rocks and let the current carry me in. Whatever was burning inside that lighthouse didn't need to hear me coming. The skiff scraped against the base of the old dock ladder iron rungs bolted into the granite, rusted so deep they looked like they'd bleed if you squeezed them. I tied off to the lowest rung and climbed. Each step groaned under my weight, and I told myself it was the metal, not my knees. The fog had thickened since I'd left the harbor. Behind me, the skiff was already disappearing. Ahead. The lighthouse tower rose into nothing, its top swallowed by cloud. The keeper's quarters sat low and square at the tower's base. A concrete blockhouse with salt-scoured windows and a door that hadn't been painted since the year I retired. Everything about this place said abandoned. Everything said forgotten. Everything said dead. Except the padlock. It was new. Bright steel. Hardware store fresh. With a rubberized shackle guard still showing the manufacturer's stamp. I put my hand on it and felt the cold of metal that hadn't been hanging here long enough to oxidize. Everything else on this building had been rotting for 12 years. But someone had walked up to this door recently enough to leave a lock that still smelled like the packaging. The light I'd seen from the water was gone. Either I'd imagined it or someone had switched it off when they heard my engine. Neither possibility made me feel better. I found what I needed 10 feet away, an iron railing spike sheared loose from the walkway by a decade of nor'easters. I wedged it behind the hasp and pulled. The screws held for 3 seconds, then tore free from concrete, so weathered it came apart like wet chalk. The door swung inward on hinges that screamed. Darkness. The smell of mildew and old concrete, and something else underneath something clean. Something that didn't belong in a room that had been sealed for over a decade. I pulled out my pocket flashlight and stepped inside. The beam swept across empty shelves, a rusted generator housing, coils of dead electrical cable. Then it hit canvas. A heavy tarp draped over something in the center of the storage room floor. Tucked neatly at the edges, the way you'd cover a piece of equipment you intended to come back for. I grabbed the corner and pulled. If the dinghy was never in the storm, then what exactly happened on that boat the night my son disappeared? The question hit me before the recognition did. But my hands knew before my brain caught up. I dropped to one knee and ran my palm along the whole smooth fiberglass. Clean gel coat, not a scratch. My flashlight found the registration sticker on the transom. Coast Guard certified, hull number MK4417. I had painted that number on myself the summer Everett launched this dinghy. I remembered the afternoon, the smell of marine paint, the way he'd stood back and nodded like a man admiring a cathedral. This was his rescue craft. The one the official report said had been torn apart by 30-foot swells. But it hadn't been torn apart. It hadn't been touched. I pressed both hands flat against the hull and let 40 years of instinct do what my spinning mind couldn't. No stress fractures along the chine. No warped fiberglass at the bow. No waterline staining from extended submersion. The seams were factory tight. The drain plug was dry. Even the oarlock sockets were clean. No salt crystal buildup, no corrosion rings. This dinghy had never touched rough water. It had been brought here on a calm day, placed on this floor, and covered with the kind of care that only someone with a reason to come back would take. I sat back on my heels. The concrete was cold through my trousers. My flashlight beam trembled because my hand was trembling and I couldn't make it stop. The official story, the storm, the swells, the lost vessel, the presumptive death certificate signed by Dr. Preston Cole, all of it had just cracked down the center like a hull hitting a reef. My son's dinghy was whole, which meant the story of his death was not. I was about to stand when my flashlight caught something else. Wedged beneath the bow seat, sealed in a waterproof case no bigger than a hardcover book. A device sat with its dark screen facing upward. As my light crossed it, a single green indicator began to pulse, steady, patient, as if it had been waiting not for anyone, but for me. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unclip the waterproof case. The latches were marine grade, designed for steady fingers on calm decks, and mine were neither. I got it open on the 3rd attempt and lifted out a ruggedized tablet, military spec, rubberized edges, the kind of hardware Everett used on commercial navigation rigs. The screen brightened the moment I held it up. A thin green line swept down from the top. Scanning, and I realized it was reading my face through the front camera. The line pulsed once, turned white, and 2 words appeared in the center of the screen against a black background. "Hello, Dad." I recognized the font. I recognized the interface layout, clean, minimal, everything in its place. The same design language Everett had built into the Marina's navigation software. My son had programmed this tablet, sealed it in a waterproof case, hidden it beneath the bow seat of a dinghy that was supposed to be destroyed, and keyed the whole thing to unlock only for my face. He had planned this, not in a panic, not in the last minutes before a storm, months in advance. A single video file sat in the center of the screen. No label, no timestamp, just a white play icon on a dark thumbnail. My finger hovered over it. The concrete floor was numbing my knees, and the waves outside the lighthouse were getting louder as the tide came in. And none of that mattered, because I was about to hear my dead son's voice for the 2nd time in 12 hours. I tapped. I had buried an empty coffin hours ago, and now my son was looking at me through a screen, alive in a recording, telling me he had known someone wanted him dead. Everett Caldwell, 39. A marine engineer whose hands could coax life from any diesel engine on the eastern seaboard, stared out from the tablet with hollow, sealess eyes and 3 days of stubble darkening his jaw. He was filming from what I recognized immediately as the engine compartment of his yacht. I could see the Cummins diesel housing behind his left shoulder, the oil pressure gauge just visible in the upper corner. "Dad," he said. His voice was steady but stripped down, the way a man sounds when he's been awake too long and has stopped pretending he's fine. 3 days before the storm, I pulled the nav module for a routine diagnostic. The waypoints had been rewritten. He held up a circuit board compactor with a ribbon cable trailing from one end. I knew what a GPS navigation module looked like, the way I knew what a carburetor looked like. I'd been reading machines my entire life. Every waypoint, Everett continued, reprogrammed to steer the yacht directly into the worst forecast zone, not close to it, not near it, into the exact center of the most dangerous coordinates the National Weather Service was tracking. He lowered the board and looked directly into the camera. The engine compartment was dim behind him, but his eyes were sharp. This wasn't a malfunction, Dad. The code was clean, professional. Someone paid to have this done. Someone who understood marine electronics well enough to hide the changes inside a routine firmware update. If I hadn't pulled the module for that diagnostic, the autopilot would have driven the yacht straight into 30-foot swells at 3 in the morning. And nobody would have asked why. A tampered navigation system is just a lie told in code, and I had spent 40 years reading machines that tried to hide what was broken inside them. A diesel engine with a cracked head gasket will run smooth for 100 hours before it seizes. A corroded fuel line will feed clean for weeks before it collapses. The trick is always the same. The damage hides behind normal function until the moment it kills you. Someone had done that to my son's boat. Someone with money, access, and the patience to wait for weather. Everett's face on the screen went still. His jaw tightened. He set the circuit board down on the engine housing and leaned closer to the camera. Fill the frame until I could see the veins in his temples and the cracked skin at the corners of his mouth. When he spoke again, his voice dropped to something raw and hollow, the voice of a man carrying a weight far heavier than his own death. But that's not the worst of it. Dad. He paused, swallowed. What I found next, I wish I'd never looked. The video ended. The screen went dark. The green indicator pulsed once more, and a second file appeared below the first. The second video started before I was ready. Ever's eyes had changed. The exhaustion was still there, but something harder had moved in behind it. Something I recognized because I'd seen it in my own mirror the morning after Lorraine died. The look of a man who has been shown something he cannot unlearn. After the nav module, I couldn't trust anyone, he said. His voice was flatter now, the emotional insulation of a man delivering facts he'd already cried over in private. So I wired the office. 3 pinhole cameras, one behind the air vent, one inside the desk lamp, one beneath the shelf clock. Motion activated, set to record between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. only. He paused. On the tablet screen, his jaw worked like he was chewing something that wouldn't go down. I expected to find a break-in, maybe a competitor, someone from the Harbor Authority, a business rival going through my files. What I found was my wife. The screen split. Ever's face shrank to the upper corner, and the surveillance footage filled the rest grainy green-tinted. The desk lamp casting a cone of light across the office I'd visited 1,000 times. The timestamp read 12:40 a.m. The office door opened and Vanessa walked in, her silhouette unmistakable. She moved to the desk without turning on the overhead lights, pulled a key from her pocket, and unlocked the bottom drawer. Have you ever watched someone you trusted walk through a door they were never supposed to open and realize they'd been opening it for months behind your back? 11 minutes later, the door opened again. Cole entered with his coat collar up, as if hiding his face from cameras he didn't know existed. He crossed to the desk, put his hand on Vanessa's shoulder, and leaned over the documents she'd spread under the lamp. Their body language told one story, the papers told another. 6 nights I recorded, Everett said from the corner of the screen. His voice didn't waver, but his eyes were wet. 6 nights she came in after midnight. 6 nights Cole followed, exactly 11 minutes later, always the same gap, like a routine they'd rehearsed. And every single meeting, the same stack of papers on the desk. The footage cycled. Night 1, night 2, night 3, the same choreography repeated with mechanical precision. Vanessa arriving first, unlocking the drawer. Cole arriving second, always that 11-minute gap. The two of them bent over the desk, pointing at lines, shuffling pages, marking things with a pen. They weren't just having an affair. Dad. Everett's voice cracked on the word, and he caught it the way you catch a dropped tool fast before it hits the ground. They were planning something. Every meeting, the same documents, my insurance policies, my coverage limits, my beneficiary designations. I zoomed in on the third night's footage until I could read the header on the top page. The surveillance image froze and magnified. Even through the grain and the green tint, I could make out the letterhead of the maritime insurance carrier, the policy number, the coverage amount, the beneficiary line. An affair is a crack in the hull. What Vanessa and Cole were doing was drilling holes below the waterline and waiting for the ship to sink. I watched my son narrate the destruction of his own marriage with the precision of an engineer reading a damage report. No self-pity, no rage. Just data points laid in sequence 6 nights, 11-minute gaps, insurance documents, the same locked drawer. The same key Vanessa kept on a chain separate from her regular set. He had cataloged his own betrayal the way he cataloged engine failure's symptom, cause, projected outcome. The footage ended. Everett's face filled the screen again, and this time I could see what carrying this alone had cost him. The skin beneath his eyes was bruised purple. His lips were dry and cracked at the corners. He looked 10 years older than 39. Dad. The cameras gave me the affair and the motive. He stopped, pressed his thumb against his temple, and breathed out slow. But it was the navigation log that gave me the proof. The yacht's electronic systems recorded every course change, every waypoint override, every manual input, time-stamped to the second. He leaned closer. The tablet speaker crackled with the shift. And what that log shows rewrites everything the Coast Guard thinks they know about the night I disappeared. The screen went dark. My knuckles were white around the tablet's edges. The concrete floor had numbed my legs completely, but I couldn't move, couldn't stand, couldn't look away from the black screen where my son's face had been. Below the second video, a third file had appeared. A spreadsheet icon. The navigation log. The proof was right there, waiting for a mechanic who knew how to read it. Numbers don't lie. That's the first thing any mechanic learns, and the first thing a murderer forgets. I tapped the navigation log, and the tablet filled with data rows of GPS timestamps, latitude-longitude pairs, engine RPM readings, helm angle, and speed over ground. The yacht's complete electronic record from the night of the storm, laid out in columns as clean and unforgiving as a hospital chart. I had spent 40 years reading gauges and pressure diagnostics. Data doesn't flatter, doesn't flinch, doesn't cover its tracks. I trusted these numbers more than I trusted anyone left alive. The Coast Guard report said Everett went overboard at 11:47 p.m. Vanessa's sworn statement matched to the minute. She told the investigators she'd been on the upper deck when a wave knocked him against the port rail. She said she saw him go over. She said she threw the life ring and called Mayday on Channel 16. The report treated her account as gospel. I scrolled through the log, line by line, the way I'd trace a wiring fault through a circuit diagram, not looking for what was there, but for what shouldn't be. The timestamps ran in sequence, 11:30, 11:35, 11:40, 11:45. The yacht was heading east-northeast at 8 knots, engine at cruising RPM, autopilot engaged, normal. Routine. The kind of data that looks like a calm night, even when the weather report says otherwise. 11:47 p.m. According to Vanessa, this was the moment. The wave, the rail, the splash, the scream she claimed nobody heard over the wind. The moment my son entered the Atlantic and never came back. But the log didn't stop at 11:47. 11:47, her lie. 12:23, the machine's truth. The engine kept running. The GPS kept tracking. The helm turned 3 times between 11:48 and 12:05. Each course correction deliberate. Each one manually entered, not autopilot, not current drift, but someone at the wheel making decisions. At 12:09, the speed dropped to 2 knots. At 12:14, the yacht's coordinates matched a position I recognized because I was sitting in it right now. The lighthouse. The yacht had come here. At 12:14 a.m., on the night my son supposedly drowned, the vessel had slowed to docking speed and held position for 6 minutes at the base of Montauk Point Lighthouse. Someone disembarked. Then, at 12:20, the engine revved back to cruising RPM and the yacht continued east along the coast for another 3 minutes before the log entries stopped at 12:23. 36 minutes of active navigation after Vanessa swore my son was already in the water. 36 minutes may not sound like much until you realize it's the difference between a grieving widow and a woman who watched her husband go over the rail and then calmly piloted his yacht to a prearranged drop point. I traced the coordinates with my finger, the tablet screen warm against my calloused skin, while the lighthouse wall pressed cold against my spine. The picture assembled itself with the inevitability of an engine turning over. Everett had found the tampered navigation. He'd found the midnight meetings. He'd known what was coming. So he'd done what any engineer would do. He'd built a contingency. The dinghy placed here in advance, the tablet sealed and hidden. The radio, programmed with a timer. And on the night of the storm, when Cole pushed him over that rail, Everett had survived because the dinghy was already waiting. Because the flotation vest was already aboard. Because the lighthouse was always the plan. Someone had docked this yacht and dropped him off. Then that someone had piloted the vessel away to make the wreckage story hold. Whether that someone was an ally or an unwitting participant, I didn't know yet. But the log was clear the yacht was crewed and steered for 36 minutes after the official time of death. Vanessa had stood in front of Coast Guard investigators and lied with the fluency of a woman who'd practiced in that midnight office for 6 nights straight. I closed the navigation log. The waves hammered the rocks below the lighthouse, and the sound came up through the floor and into my bones. My knees had gone completely numb from the concrete, but I wasn't ready to stand yet because the tablet still had more to show me. Below the navigation log, below the video files, there was one more folder. Its icon sat at the bottom of the screen like something placed there last. Saved for the moment when I thought I'd already seen the worst. The folder was labeled with a name I hadn't spoken aloud in 4 years. Lorraine, my wife. Dead of heart failure at 61, natural causes, the death certificate said. Signed by the Harbor District's chief medical examiner. Signed by Dr. Preston Cole. I almost opened the Lorraine folder first. My hand hovered over her name, the way you'd hover over a headstone, afraid that touching it would make the loss real all over again. But the tablet cued the next video automatically, and Everett's whisper stopped me cold. He was closer to the camera now, filling the frame from the chin up, and the yacht's engine compartment behind him had gone dark. He was filming at night. His voice had dropped to something barely above breath, the whisper of a man who suspected the walls were listening. "Dad, I need you to see this." He held up a document, printed, formal, dense with fine print. Even through the tablet screen, I recognized the layout of a maritime insurance policy. I had seen enough of them in 40 years of port work to know the structure by heart. Coverage section, exclusions, endorsements, beneficiary designation. But I had never seen one with a number like this. 7.8 million, Everett said, payable on death or official declaration of disappearance at sea. Double indemnity clause, meaning the payout doubles if the policyholder is lost in maritime circumstances. They didn't just want me gone, Dad. They wanted me gone in the water. He turned the document toward the camera and pointed to the signature line at the bottom. I could see the ink blue. Careful. The kind of handwriting that tries too hard to look natural. The signature on this policy is mine, except I never signed it. He held up a second page, a comparison sheet he'd made himself, placing his real signature next to the one on the policy. Even on the small screen, the differences were visible to anyone who'd spent a lifetime reading precision. The forged version was too slow, too controlled. Real signatures are fast and sloppy because the hand knows the pattern by muscle memory. This one had been drawn. It's Vanessa's handwriting, Everett said, slowed down, practiced. She probably spent weeks getting it right. $7.8 million. That was the price tag they'd hung on my son's life. The way you'd price a vessel for scrap. The policy had been taken out 3 months before the storm, through an offshore brokerage that specialized in high-value maritime coverage. The kind of agency that handles tanker fleets and commercial shipping lines, not individual yacht owners. The kind of agency where a domestic regulator wouldn't think to look. Everett's face hardened on screen. He set the policy document down and picked up another page, this one a corporate registration filing. Primary beneficiary is Vanessa. No surprise there. But look at the contingent beneficiary. He held the filing up. A company name was printed across the top in bold type, Coastal Medical Consulting, LLC. One shareholder, one registered agent. Everett's voice was steady now, the whisper gone, replaced by the flat precision of a man reading a verdict. Preston Cole. How long do you have to practice someone's signature before you can forge it without your hand shaking? How many nights in that midnight office, bent over insurance documents, running a pen across practice sheets until the loops and crosses matched well enough to fool a broker who didn't want to look too closely? They split it. Everett continued. Vanessa gets the marina and the primary insurance payout. Cole gets the overflow through his shell company, clean on paper, rotten underneath. He paused. The camera caught the pulse in his temple. When he spoke again, his voice carried something I had never heard from my son before. Not anger, not fear, but the cold recognition of a man who has finally understood the full shape of what is trying to kill him. They don't just want my money, Dad. They want my life. The video ended. The screen returned to the file list, and the lighthouse walls pressed in around me. The wind had picked up outside. I could hear it shrieking through the gaps in the keeper's quarters, carrying salt, and the sound of waves that suddenly felt too close. The tablet was warm in my hands. My throat was so dry it hurt to swallow. I looked at the screen. Below the video files. Below the navigation log I'd already read, the folder sat exactly where it had been waiting since I first powered on this tablet. Lorraine, my wife's name, glowing on the screen of a dead man's tablet. 4 years after I'd stood at her graveside and listened to the minister say the words that were supposed to make it final. My finger touched the icon before my courage could fail me. The folder opened, and the first thing inside was not a document or a photograph. It was a voice I had not heard in 4 years, and it broke me before it said a single word. A small icon pulsed at the bottom of the tablet. Everett had connected an external hard drive to the device. A tiny solid-state unit no bigger than a matchbox, tucked into a port on the tablet's side that I hadn't noticed. Its blue indicator light blinked twice and held steady. The drive contained 2 audio files and several scanned documents. I tapped the first audio file. The lighthouse filled with the sound of my wife. Lorraine Caldwell's voice came through the tablet speaker as a frail whisper, a voice I had last heard in a hospital room 4 years ago, when she was 61, and the monitors beside her bed were already telling the story's ending. I had forgotten the exact sound of it. You think you'll remember forever, but grief files the edges down until all you have left is an echo of an echo. And then she spoke, and it was like she was sitting right beside me in the dark. Arthur, I'm recording this because I don't know how much longer I can keep going without telling someone. Her breathing was labored. I could hear the pauses where she gathered strength between sentences. The same pauses I remembered from those last months when climbing the cottage stairs left her winded. The pills taste different now. Bitter. Started about 8 months ago. I asked Vanessa about it and she said the pharmacy changed the formula. But my hands shake worse every week. My vision blurs in the mornings. I can't hold a coffee cup before noon. 4 years. For 4 years, I had visited her grave and apologized for not taking better care of her, for not noticing sooner, for not insisting on a second opinion when Cole signed the death certificate and said her heart had simply given out. And she had been protecting us the entire time. I think something is wrong with the medication. I think Vanessa is adding something, or changing the dosage, or I don't know, I'm not a doctor. But I know what my body felt like before, and I know what it feels like now. And something changed when she started bringing me my pills instead of letting me get them from the bottle myself. Lorraine's voice dropped. The whisper became something smaller, the voice of a woman, pressing her mouth close to a recorder because she was afraid of being heard through the walls of her own home. I can't tell you. Arthur, I can't tell anyone. She sat me down 3 months ago, and she told me she said if I told you or Everett or anyone, she would make sure something happened to Everett. She didn't say what. She didn't have to. I looked in her eyes, and I believed her. The recording crackled. Lorraine coughed a deep, wet sound that I recognized from those final weeks. So I'll stay quiet. I'll drink the tea she makes me. I'll take the pills she brings me, and I'll pray that God sees what I cannot prove. Imagine hearing the woman you loved most in this world explain, in her own fading voice, that she chose to die so your child could live. Imagine sitting on a cold concrete floor in an abandoned lighthouse, holding a tablet between hands that have fixed 10,000 engines but couldn't fix the one thing that mattered. Listening to your wife describe her own murder and forgive you for not seeing it. The recording ran for another 30 seconds. Lorraine's breathing, the creak of what sounded like a rocking chair. Then a single sentence, so quiet, the speaker almost lost it. I love you, Arthur. I'm sorry I couldn't be braver. The audio ended. The lighthouse was silent except for the waves hammering the rocks below and my own breathing, which came in ragged pulls that echoed off the stone walls like something wounded. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, the same calloused hand that had held hers in the hospital bed the night her heart finally stopped. The night I thought her heart had failed on its own. The night Cole stood at the foot of the bed with his clipboard and his practice sympathy and told me these things sometimes just happen. She died protecting our son. And I spent 4 years believing I had failed to protect her. I wrong. The tablet screen brightened. Everett's next video loaded automatically, and the first frame showed him holding up a yellowed pharmacy lab report. 3 numbers were circled in red ink, and even from the freeze frame, I could see his hand was shaking. 3 numbers circled in red, and each one was a death sentence my wife had swallowed without knowing it. Everett held the lab report steady for the camera with both hands, the yellowed paper filling the screen. His voice had gone clinical, the way it did when he was reading engine diagnostics facts first, feelings later. The lab tested the pills I found in Mom's old medicine cabinet at the house. Digoxin, her heart medication. I sent them to an independent pharmaceutical lab in Hartford. No names attached, just the sample and a request for composition analysis. He tapped the first circled number with his fingernail. The prescribed dose was standard for her condition. What the pills actually contained was nearly triple that, enough to wear her heart down without ever raising suspicion. He moved his finger to the second circle. Duration of altered dosage based on the pill count remaining in the bottle and the original fill date 8 months, 240 days. The third circle. Projected cardiac impact at sustained triple dosage, progressive myocardial deterioration resulting in complete heart failure. At that level, it doesn't kill fast. It weakens the heart muscle week by week, contraction by contraction, until one night it simply stops. And every coroner in the country would call it natural cardiac failure because that's exactly what it looks like from the outside. 8 months, 240 days of measured poison delivered in a pill bottle with her name printed neatly on the label. I thought about Lorraine's last months. The way she'd stopped gardening because her hands shook too much to hold the trowel. The way she'd sit at the top of the cottage stairs and catch her breath for 3 minutes before coming down. The way she'd told me the new pills tasted bitter, and I'd said what Vanessa told her to say, that the pharmacy must have changed the formula. I had repeated the lie for her. I had been part of the machine that killed her without ever knowing the engine was running. Everett set down the lab report and picked up a second document, a pharmacy dispensing printout. The kind generated automatically when a prescription is filled or adjusted. The paper was different, whiter, printed from a dot matrix archive system. This is the original dispensing record, he said. I pulled it from the pharmacy's offline backup server before anyone knew I was looking. The live database was modified 6 months after Mom died. Someone logged in and changed the dosage records to show standard amounts. Clean, professional edit. But the offline backup runs on a separate cycle and nobody thought to touch it. He held the printout closer. Line after line of prescription adjustments, each one dated, each one stamped with a prescribing physician's authorization code. And next to every single entry, the same name. Every dose adjustment over those 8 months was signed by Dr. Preston Cole. Every one. He didn't just know about it, he prescribed it. He calibrated the exact amount that would destroy her heart slowly enough to fool anyone who wasn't looking for it. He sat at our kitchen table. He ate the food she cooked for him. He complimented her pot roast and asked after her garden and held her wrist to check her pulse with fingers that had written the prescription killing her. And every week, he wrote another adjustment that pushed her one step closer to a grave he had already measured. For 4 years, I shook that man's hand. For 4 years, I invited him into my home at holidays because Vanessa said it would be nice to include him, because he'd been so kind during Lorraine's illness, because he'd done everything he could. For 4 years, I thanked him. Everett's voice cracked once on the word mom, and he caught it the way I'd taught him to catch a dropped wrench, fast, clean, before it hits the ground. They changed the pharmacy records afterward. Dad. But I pulled the backup before they could touch it. The originals don't lie. The video paused. I pressed my fists against my closed eyes until I saw white. The pressure built behind my skull like a gauge climbing past the red line. The lighthouse walls felt like they were contracting, the stone squeezing inward, the air getting thinner. Preston Cole had stood 3 feet from me at Lorraine's funeral. He had put his hand on my shoulder and said the words that people say when death is supposed to be natural and blameless and nobody's fault. And I had believed him because I had no reason not to. The screen brightened. Everett's face reappeared. Harder than before, the hollows under his eyes darker. When he spoke, his voice had changed. No longer the voice of a son delivering evidence, but the voice of a man who had made a decision that cost him everything. Now let me tell you why I had to disappear. How do you disappear from a boat in the middle of a storm and make 2 murderers believe they've already won? My son answered that question the way he answered everything with engineering. Everett sat straighter in the video. The exhaustion was still there, but something had shifted underneath it. A steel framework rising through the fatigue. His voice lost the rawness and took on the clipped precision of a man walking through a schematic. They were going to kill me on the water, Dad. I knew that the moment I pulled the nav module. So I decided to die first on my schedule, not theirs. He held up a hand-drawn diagram of the yacht's hull, portside, with measurements and annotations in his neat block lettering. A small rectangle was marked beneath the waterline near the stern. The storm was forecast 8 days out. That gave me time. I pre-positioned the rescue dinghy here at the lighthouse, brought it over on a calm night and locked it in the storage room. Then I bolted a secondary inflatable beneath the yacht's waterline on the starboard side, low enough that you'd have to be underwater to see it. 3-point inflation system. Manual release. 15-second deployment. He flipped to a second diagram, a nautical chart with 2 lines drawn from the same origin point. One arrow pointed south, following the Labrador Current. The other pointed north, toward the lighthouse. On the night of the storm, Cole did exactly what I expected. He waited until the seas were rough enough to cover the sound, and he pushed me over the starboard rail. My son had turned his own murder into a machine. Every gear measured, every bolt placed, every outcome calculated before the first wave hit the hull. What Cole didn't know was that I was wearing a flotation vest under my jacket. Thin, compact, commercial dive grade, the kind that holds you at the surface without looking like a life preserver. I hit the water and went under for about 12 seconds, long enough for the yacht to clear 50 yards. Then I surfaced, reached the inflatable, and was inside it before anyone on deck could have seen me, even if the visibility had been perfect, which it wasn't. He tapped the southbound arrow on the chart. I released a decoy emergency beacon into the current, standard maritime EPIRB, registered to the yacht. The Labrador current carried it south at 2.3 knots. When the Coast Guard picked up the signal, they deployed their search grid based on the beacon's drift pattern. They searched south for 4 days. His finger moved to the northbound arrow. I went north. 3 nautical miles in a motorized inflatable through 6-foot swells. Not comfortable, but survivable. By the time the sun came up, I was inside this lighthouse with the door locked behind me. He used my grief as camouflage. And the worst part is, I understand why it had to be that way. Everett set down the chart. His face filled the screen again. And for the first time in these videos, he wasn't holding a document or a diagram. His hands were empty and his eyes were wet. "I'm sorry I made you grieve, Dad." The words came out like something he'd been rehearsing for weeks and still couldn't say without cracking. I needed them to believe I was gone. If you had known if there was even the slightest change in how you acted, how you grieved, how you looked at Vanessa, they would have known. Your grief had to be real. It was the only proof they'd accept. He swallowed hard. It was the only way to make them move, and the only way to keep you safe while they did. They wouldn't bother with a broken old man who'd already lost his son. They'd move on to collecting the money, and that's when they'd make mistakes. 21 days. He had let me sit in that cottage for 21 days, staring at harbor lights through the fog, believing my son was dead on the ocean floor. He had let me attend an empty funeral and listen to a minister speak over a box with nothing inside it. He had let me shake Cole's hand at the reception. And he had done it because he loved me enough to know that my real grief was the one thing that would keep me alive. The video paused on his face. He looked directly into the camera, directly into my eyes, and I saw my own jaw, my own stubbornness, my own refusal to let a broken machine stay broken. "Dad, the evidence you need to end this is inside the marina, behind the sailboat painting in Vanessa's office. And you'll need someone on the inside to get you through the door." Everett pulled up a hand-drawn blueprint of the marina office on screen, and the last trace of grief left his voice. This was no longer a father explaining his suffering. This was a mission briefing. The blueprint was precise block lettering, clean dimensions, the same drafting hand that had designed navigation systems for commercial vessels. "Every vessel in this marina still runs my override code, including hers," he added, almost as an afterthought. He pointed to the east wall of the executive office. "Behind the oil painting of the schooner, concealed panel, spring latch on the left edge. You press inward and it releases. Behind the panel, recessed into the drywall between the studs, there's a combination safe, fireproof, bolt-locked, about the size of a briefcase." His finger moved to a notation in the corner of the blueprint. "Combination is my birthday. Month, day, year. You'll know it." I did. I could see it without closing my eyes, the number I'd written on hospital forms and school registrations, and the first marina insurance policy I'd ever co-signed. Some numbers you carry in your bones. Inside you'll find the pharmacy originals, the full camera archive on a backup drive, and something else. He paused. His hand dropped from the screen. When I installed the safe, I found documents that were already hidden in that wall cavity. Not mine, not from the marina. Papers with a different name on them. A name I didn't recognize at first, but you will when you see them. Dad. They change everything about who Vanessa really is. Documents with a different name. Whose name, if not the one she'd given my son when she married him? Everett let the question hang. He didn't explain further. He moved on with the discipline of a man who had already spent too long recording and needed to finish before his window closed. "You can't go through the front. Vanessa changed the locks 2 days after the memorial, and the security code rotates every 72 hours. But there's a service entrance on the north side of the building, an old delivery door from when the marina office was a chandlery. It still uses a physical key." He held up a business card with a phone number written on the back in blue ink. "Rosa Pennington. She's been with us 12 years. She manages the office, handles the scheduling, keeps the books balanced. She has a key to that service entrance. She's scared. Dad. Vanessa watches everyone who works there, checks their phones, monitors their hours, controls who comes and goes. But Rosa is loyal. She stayed because of Everett. Tell her I sent you, she'll believe it. I memorized the number the way I memorized torque specifications once. Permanently. No margin for error. I repeated it 3 times in my head while staring at the card on screen, then closed my eyes and set it backward to make sure it had locked in. The video ended. The tablet screen dimmed to its idle glow, and for the first time in hours, I became aware of the lighthouse around me again. The light through the round window had gone amber late afternoon, the sun already dropping toward the water. I had been inside this building since morning. I hadn't eaten, hadn't drunk anything since the coffee I'd left cold on my cottage table before dawn. My legs were numb from the concrete floor, and my shoulders ached from hunching over the screen. I had watched every video, heard every truth, and carried every revelation on a pair of 67-year-old shoulders. But none of it mattered unless I could get through that door tonight. I pulled out my phone. The signal was weak this far out on the point, 2 bars, flickering. I dialed Rosa's number in the darkness of the lighthouse and pressed the phone against my ear hard enough to feel the edge of the case against cheekbone. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3. Then a voice answered, quiet, cautious. The voice of a woman who checked the caller before she spoke. Rosa Pennington. 12 years with the Caldwell family, the Marina's office manager. A woman caught between loyalty to a family she loved and terror of the woman who now signed her checks. Mr. Caldwell. She recognized my number. Her whisper was so low I had to press the phone harder to hear. I've been waiting for someone to call. I've been keeping notes, the late-night phone calls, the visitors after hours, the documents she shreds every Friday. But you need to come tonight. The amber light in the window was fading. She's planning to clear out the office tomorrow. Everything. If you don't come tonight, there won't be anything left to find. Tomorrow was already too late. I had to move now. I hung up the phone, shoved the tablet deep inside my coat, and took the lighthouse stairs 2 at a time. My knees screamed on every step, but something stronger than adrenaline was driving the pistons now. Rosa had given me the window. North entrance, 11 o'clock. 20 minutes. She would kill the hallway motion sensor on the 2nd floor and leave the service door unlocked. After 20 minutes, the system would auto-reset and every sensor in the building would come back online. If I was still inside when that happened, the alarm would bring both of them running. 20 minutes. I had rebuilt entire fuel injector assemblies in less time. This was just another machine to take apart, find the access point, remove the faulty components, extract what was hidden inside. But Rosa's last words had changed the geometry of the problem. Cole was already there. He'd arrived an hour ago. Both of them were in the ground floor lounge directly beneath the executive office. I would have to enter through the north door, climb the rear staircase, cross the 2nd floor hallway, open the concealed panel, crack the safe, collect the contents, and leave all without a single footstep loud enough to carry through the ceiling. I reached the bottom of the lighthouse stairs and pushed through the door into the October evening. Rain had started again, not heavy, but steady. The kind that turns everything gray and muffles sound. Good. Rain was an ally tonight. The skiff was where I'd left it, tied to the rusted ladder, rocking gently against the rocks. I checked the tablet and hard drive one more time, both secure inside the waterproof lining of my coat, pressed against my ribs where I could feel them with every breath. Then I untied the bowline and pushed off. The outboard caught on the first pull. I throttled down to idle and let the skiff nose west toward the harbor. The lighthouse fell behind me, dark again, keeping its secrets in the stone. 20 minutes. The same amount of time it takes to rebuild a fuel injector or to crack open a safe and pull out everything someone has spent years trying to hide. The rain hit my face and I didn't wipe it away. I was thinking about this morning. About the man who had climbed into this skiff at dawn with shaking hands and a dead son's radio, heading east into fog because a voice had told him to follow a number. That man had been grieving. That man had been lost. That man had been exactly what Vanessa wanted him to be, broken, confused, too old to matter. That man was gone. I had spent the day inside a lighthouse, reading blueprints and watching videos and listening to the dead speak. I had learned that my wife was murdered with calibrated precision by a man who ate at our table. I had learned that my son had engineered his own death to survive a conspiracy that stretched back years. I had held a lab report that turned grief into evidence and a forged signature that turned suspicion into proof. They had thrown me a radio and called it junk. And that junk had led me to every secret they thought they'd buried. The marina lights appeared through the rain first as a smear of yellow, then as distinct points, sharpening with every yard. I could see the silhouette of the main building, 2 stories of cedar and glass perched on the waterfront. The ground floor lounge glowed warm through its bay windows. I imagined them in there, Vanessa with her composure and her crimson nails, Cole with his practiced calm, drinking, perhaps, reviewing documents they planned to shred in the morning, believing they had already won because the old man they'd discarded was too broken to fight and too stupid to look. I cut the engine 200 yards out and let the current carry the skiff in silence. The rain covered the sound of the hull slicing through flat water. The marina dock emerged from the dark. Pilings streaked with green algae. The north side of the building just visible past the fuel storage shed. Somewhere inside that building, behind a painting on the east wall, a safe held the evidence that could end both of them. And in the lounge below, 2 people who had killed my wife and tried to kill my son sat comfortable and warm, trusting the locks and the alarms and the assumption that grief made weak. I tied the skiff to the outermost piling and stepped onto the dock. The wood was slick with rain. My boots found their grip. I wasn't running from them anymore. I was going collect. Rosa was standing at the north entrance with the door already cracked open, and the first thing I noticed was that her hands were shaking worse than mine. She grabbed my wrist and pulled me inside before I could speak. The corridor was dark emergency lighting only, a faint green glow from the exit signs that turned everything the color of deep water. She pressed a key into my palm, cold metal, and started whispering so fast I had to lean in to catch it. I kept notes. Mr. Caldwell, every call after midnight, every time Cole came in through the side dock, dates, times, phone numbers when I could get them. It's in my desk second drawer, under the supply orders. Take it if you can. Her eyes were wide, darting toward the corridor that led to the main building. They're downstairs right now. The music is on, but it won't cover your footsteps on the stairs if you're not careful. Stay to the left side. The right side creaks at the 4th and 9th steps. 20 minutes, Mr. Caldwell. That's all I can give you. She squeezed my arm once, hard. The grip of a woman who had spent weeks watching killers walk past her desk and saying nothing. Then she slipped back through the service door and was gone. I stood alone in the green-lit corridor. 20 minutes. The motion sensor would reset, and if I was still inside this building, I would be the one who disappeared next. I moved. The carpet was industrial-grade thin, tight-woven, designed to absorb sound. My wet boots left prints, but made no noise. The corridor ran south toward the main staircase, passing the ground floor lounge on the left. I could see the strip of warm light beneath the lounge door amber, the color of whiskey and wood fires. Classical music leaked through the gap. Something with strings, low and steady. I was 3 steps past the lounge when Vanessa's voice stopped me. Not because she'd seen me, because the lounge door was open 2 inches and her words carried into the corridor like smoke. 7 days. The maritime underwriter confirmed it. Once the declaration of death is finalized, the full amount deposits directly. We're almost there. I pressed my back against the wall. The plaster was cold through my coat. Through the gap in the door, I could see a sliver of the room, the edge of a leather chair, a glass of something dark on the side table, Cole's hand resting beside it. And the old man... Cole's voice was loose, relaxed. A man who had finished working for the day and was enjoying the results. He's a senile mechanic, Vanessa. He can barely remember what day it is. He's not a problem. The same way you handled his wife. 6 words, spoken like a restaurant order, and every one of them a confession to murder. He becomes a problem if he's still breathing when the money hits, Vanessa said. Her voice didn't rise or fall. It stayed perfectly level, the way you'd discuss adjusting a thermostat. Handle him the same way you handled his wife. Clean, quiet, no trace. Cole laughed a short, professional sound, the laugh of a man agreeing to a procedure. Same compound. Give me 3 weeks, and it'll look like his heart gave out from the grief. Poetic. You have 7 days, not 3 weeks. The deposit lands, and we liquidate the marina the same month. I don't want him breathing when that wire transfer clears. I couldn't move. My spine was fused to the wall. The sweat on the back of my neck had gone cold, and the metallic taste in my mouth was so sharp I thought I might be bleeding from biting the inside of my cheek. 7 days. They were going to kill me with the same compound that had killed Lorraine. The same slow, invisible poison that Cole had calibrated to destroy a heart 1 beat at a time. And they discussed it 10 feet from where I stood, separated by 2 inches of door and a lifetime of the contempt they felt for an old man they'd already written off. The music swelled. A chair creaked. Someone stood up. I peeled myself off the wall and moved. Left side of the staircase, Rosa had said left. I placed each foot with the deliberation of a man walking across the deck of a boat in heavy weather, testing the surface before committing the weight. 4th step, skip. 9th step, skip. The carpet held. The wood beneath it stayed silent. I had 7 days, and I'd just learned I was next on their list. But first I had to get upstairs, open that safe, and leave this building without a sound. The executive office door was unlocked. The kind of carelessness that only comes from people who believe no one would ever dare walk in. I reached the 2nd floor landing with 12 minutes left on Rosa's window. The hallway was dark, the motion sensor a dead eye on the wall thanks to Rosa's override. I turned the handle and stepped inside. The office smelled like Vanessa, that cloying perfume I'd first noticed at the memorial, layered over leather and polished teak. I didn't turn on the lights. My phone's flashlight was enough, cupped in my palm so the beam stayed narrow and low. The sailboat painting hung on the east wall exactly where Everett's blueprint had placed it. Oil on canvas. A schooner heeling hard in a storm, waves crashing over the bow. The kind of painting people buy to look nautical without ever having been on the water. I pressed the left edge. The spring latch released with a soft click, and the painting swung outward on concealed hinges, revealing a rectangular cavity cut into the drywall between the studs. The safe sat recessed inside compact fireproof, a single combination dial centered on the door. March 15th, 1984, the day my son was born. I'd written that date on hospital forms, school registrations, insurance policies. My fingers found the numbers without hesitation. Right to 3, left to 15, right to 84. The lock clicked once, the cleanest sound I'd heard all night. Opening that safe felt like cracking the engine block on a machine that had been running wrong for years, every corroded part finally laid bare inside. The original pharmacy dispensing records were on top, printed on continuous feed paper, the kind generated by an old dot matrix archive system. Below them, a compact hard drive and a static-proof bag, the master backup of Everett's surveillance footage. I placed both inside my coat. Beneath them, pressed against the back of the safe, was something Everett had warned me about but hadn't fully explained. An unmarked manila folder, heavier than it looked, its edges worn from handling. I opened it. The first item was a driver's license. not from New York. The state was different. The address was different. The name printed beside the photograph was a name I had never heard before. But the face in the photograph was one I had seen yesterday, sitting across from me in a chapel pew, with dry eyes and crimson nails. Vanessa's face, someone else's name. Different name, different state, different husband. Same story, same ending. Beneath the license. Newspaper clippings, 3 of them, yellowed at the edges, carefully cut. The headlines told a story so similar to my own that my vision blurred reading them. A husband, a charter boat operator who had vanished during a storm off the coast. His body never recovered. His wife, the woman in the driver's license photo, had collected an insurance payout and relocated. The case was never solved. The wife was never charged. She simply disappeared and became someone else. Became Vanessa Lockwood. The clippings were dated 3 years before she married Everett. She had arrived in Montauk with a new name, a new background, and a method that had already worked once. She had married my son the way a carpenter selects lumber, measuring the value before making the cut. Everett had found these documents hidden in the wall cavity when he installed the safe. They were already there, tucked behind the drywall, left by Vanessa herself, the identity she had shed like a snake, leaving its skin behind a loose panel. She'd kept them the way some criminals keep trophies. The proof of a life she thought no one would ever find. I held the folder open and stared at the driver's license photo. Same bone structure, different hair color, darker in the old photograph. The kind of change a salon could accomplish in an afternoon. Same eyes. The eyes hadn't changed. Cold, calculating, patient. The eyes of a woman who had done this before and intended to do it again. This wasn't her first time. I was just the next name on a list. I shoved the folder inside my coat with the pharmacy records and the hard drive. The evidence pressed against my ribs like ballast, heavy and solid and real. I reached for the painting to swing it back into place. Then I heard it. The sharp click of high heels on hardwood. Not downstairs in the lounge on this floor. In the hallway. Coming closer with the deliberate rhythm of a woman who owned every square foot she walked on. The footsteps stopped directly in front of the office door. The door handle began to turn. The door handle turned, and I had exactly 2 seconds to choose between being caught and being invisible. I swung the painting back over the safe, felt the spring latch catch, and threw myself behind the floor-length drapes flanking the office window. The velvet swallowed me, heavy and stale, pressing against my face like a hand. I pulled my boots back until only an inch of fabric separated their toes from the open floor. The door opened. Vanessa's perfume entered the room before she did. It filled the office the way it had filled the chapel, dense, expensive, suffocating. I heard her heels cross the hardwood in 5 measured steps. The desk chair didn't creak, which meant she hadn't sat down. She was standing at the desk, and through the narrow gap at the bottom of the drapes, I could see her shadow elongated by the hallway light, stretching across the floor like something predatory. She opened a drawer. Paper shuffled. A folder slid across the desk's surface. Then her phone rang. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was low, clipped, the voice of a woman conducting business at midnight, because midnight was when the real work happened. "It's me. I'm grabbing the quarterly projections. Listen, we have a problem. Have you ever stood close enough to a killer to smell her perfume, knowing that if she pulled back that curtain, you would never leave this room alive?" I had my face pressed against dusty velvet and my ribs crushed against the evidence that could destroy her. And I could hear her breathing 10 feet away. That deckhand, Milo. She said the name like flicking an insect off her sleeve. He's been jumpy all week, coming in late, leaving early, won't look anyone in the eye. I don't like it. He was paid enough to keep his mouth shut, but if he gets any braver, have someone remind him what happens to people who talk. Silence. Cole was speaking on the other end. I couldn't hear his words, only the faint vibration of a male voice through the phone's speaker. "I don't care how you do it," Vanessa said. "Just make sure he stays quiet until the money clears. After that, he's disposable." She paused. When she spoke again, her voice carried the same flat temperature it had in the lounge when she'd ordered my death. "Disposable like everyone else around here." She said it the way someone throws away a paper cup. No weight, no hesitation, no awareness that the words described a human being who had a name and a life, and the terrible misfortune of having seen something he shouldn't have. Milo, a deckhand, someone who was on the yacht the night my son went into the water. Someone they had paid for silence and were now discussing erasing like a line item on a budget sheet. A witness. Vanessa closed the folder. Her heels crossed the office in the opposite direction 5 steps back toward the door. The light from the hallway widened, then narrowed, then disappeared as the door clicked shut behind her. I stood behind the curtain for another 30 seconds. My heartbeat was counting down what was left of Rosa's window. I could feel each pulse in my neck, my wrists, the backs of my knees. The perfume was still in the air, thick enough to taste, mixing with the dust from the velvet until my throat burned. Then I moved. The first thing I did was look at the office window. Double hung, brass hardware. Old enough that the lock was a simple latch twist. I flipped it and pushed the lower sash upward. It resisted, then broke free with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I froze, listened. No footsteps, no reaction from below. The window opened outward over the boat shed roof, a corrugated metal slope that dropped 8 feet to the dock level. Rain was still falling, steady and cold. It was the only way out that didn't take me past the lounge. I checked the evidence inside my coat one final time. The pharmacy records. The hard drive. The manila folder with a dead woman's driver's license and a living woman's face. All secure against my ribs. One name, Milo. A deckhand who was there the night my son went into the water. A witness they thought they had bought. A man who was growing nervous, growing brave, growing dangerous to the people who had paid him to forget what he saw. I engraved that name in my memory, like marking steel. Then I swung one leg over the windowsill and lowered myself onto the rain-slicked roof. The salt wind hit my face like a slap from the Atlantic itself. Cold, clean, alive. The opposite of everything inside that building. The corrugated roof groaned under my weight the moment both feet landed. I froze. One hand braced against the metal, the other pressed over the evidence inside my coat. The groan faded into the night. From below, the muffled sound of classical music drifted through the lounge windows. The same strings that had nearly covered my footsteps on the stairs were now covering the sound of my escape. Their music, my shield. I stayed low and moved. The roof pitched at maybe 15 degrees, slick with rain, and the corrugation ridges were the only thing keeping my boots from sliding. Every step sent a dull metallic vibration through the sheeting that I felt in my teeth. I edged along the pitch toward the gutter line, keeping my center of gravity over my feet the way you balance on a boat deck in rough weather, knees bent. Weight forward. Never trust the surface. You want to know what 67 feels like on a metal roof at midnight? It feels like every joint you've ever ignored is suddenly presenting an invoice. My left knee sent a bolt of pain up through my hip with each step. My right shoulder, the one I'd torn hauling a diesel block 20 years ago, burned where I'd caught myself on the windowsill. The rain was cold enough to make my fingers clumsy, but the evidence was warm against my ribs, and that was enough. I reached the gutter. Below it, stacked against the boat shed wall, a pile of old lobster traps formed a rough staircase down to the dock level. I lowered myself over the edge, found a crossbar with my foot, tested it, and let my weight drop. The trap frame held. The ropes creaked, but didn't give. I climbed down 3 traps and dropped the last 4 feet to the dock planking. My knees buckled on impact. I caught myself on the trap stack and held still, breathing hard, tasting copper and salt. The marina spread out around me, dock lights reflecting off black water, fuel dock to the south. The main building behind me, with its warm lounge glow painting the puddles amber. Nobody had followed. Nobody had heard. I patted my coat. The pharmacy records, the hard drive, the manila folder with a dead woman's license and a living woman's crimes, and folded tight against my chest. The ledger page I'd palmed from the desk before Vanessa walked in. A quarterly financial summary with dates and figures that would cross-reference against everything Everett had already shown me. I walked. Not fast, not panicked. The walk of a man who has found every broken part and knows exactly which wrench to use. 4 threads. The insurance fraud, a forged policy with a double indemnity clause designed to profit from a death at sea. The staged disappearance, a tampered navigation system, a decoy beacon, and a yacht that docked at a lighthouse 36 minutes after the official time of death. A witness, a deckhand named Milo, who had been on that boat, who had been paid to forget what he saw, and who was growing nervous enough to become dangerous. And the identity, a woman who had done all of this before, under another name, in another state, to another husband who never came home from the water. 4 threads, and I was going to weave them into a net strong enough to drag my own son back to shore. The cottage was 300 yards from the marina dock, set back from the waterline on a low bluff. I covered the distance in the rain without looking back. The door was locked the way I'd left it. I went inside, bolted it behind me, and stood in the dark kitchen for 10 seconds, listening to nothing but the rain and my own breathing settling back to something human. Then I turned on the lamp. The kitchen table, the same table where Lorraine had served Sunday dinners, where Everett had done his homework as a kid, where I'd sat 2 nights ago, holding a radio and waiting for the dead to speak, that table became my workbench. I spread the ledger page flat under the light. I laid the hard drive beside it. I stacked the pharmacy records and the manila folder in order. I picked up the phone and dialed Rosa's number. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been holding the phone in her hand since the moment I climbed out that window. I wasn't running. I was on my way to build a trap. Rosa didn't say hello. She said, "I've been counting the minutes. Are you out?" "I'm out," I told her. "I'm at the cottage. Everything's here." Her breath released on the other end like a valve opening. "I left through the loading dock 2 minutes after you went upstairs. Nobody saw me. I drove home the long way around in case anyone was watching the marina entrance." "You did good." "Rosa." "Mr. Caldwell, there's something else." I called Diane. I stopped. Diane Ellis, my wife's closest friend, Everett's godmother. A woman who had gone quiet after the memorial and hadn't returned a single call. I had assumed she'd given up on the family. I had assumed wrong. "She picked up on the second ring," Rosa said. "She's been waiting, longer than either of us. She told me she suspected Vanessa since before the memorial, something about the way the insurance paperwork moved too fast. Signatures appearing on forms nobody remembers signing. She didn't say anything because Vanessa made it clear what happens to people who ask questions. The family's silence hadn't been complicity, it had been fear. Every person in Vanessa's orbit had been held in place by the same invisible pressure, the understanding that speaking up meant becoming the next problem to be solved. "I need you to find someone," I said. "A deckhand named Milo. He works the fuel dock, morning shift." "What did he see?" "That's what we're going to find out. You think a 67-year-old man can't wage a war? Let me tell you what a lifetime on the water teaches you about patience. It teaches you that the sea doesn't care about your schedule. It teaches you that the man who waits for the tide wins over the man who fights it. And it teaches you that the most dangerous person in any harbor is the one everybody has already written off. Before I tell you what I did next to prepare for what was coming, are you still with me? Drop your guess in one sentence. What do you think my next move was? Please note. Some of what follows includes details adapted for storytelling purposes. The message behind it is what matters. I hung up the phone and went to the Marine first aid kit mounted on the wall beside the bathroom door. It was a heavy steel box I'd stocked myself over the years, suture kits, antiseptic, burn dressings, and in the bottom compartment, a sealed bottle of activated charcoal tablets, standard equipment on any commercial vessel. The kind of thing you carry in case someone accidentally swallows engine coolant or contaminated bilge water. I wasn't worried about accidents. I cracked the seal, shook 6 tablets into a coffee mug, and ground them with the back of a spoon. The black powder filled the mug like soot. I added 2 inches of water and stirred until the mixture turned into something that looked like ink and smelled like a cold furnace. The charcoal tasted like chalk and diesel. I swallowed it anyway. A man who would forge an insurance policy and poison a woman's heart medication would not hesitate to arrange another quiet death. If they came for me, when they came for me, I intended to be ready. Activated charcoal binds to cardiac glycosides. It doesn't neutralize them completely, but it buys time. Enough time for the poison to pass through instead of stopping the heart. Cole had used patience and chemistry as weapons. I would use the same tools as a shield. I sat at the kitchen table and reviewed everything one final time. The evidence spread before me in the lamplight. Pharmacy records, surveillance footage, the forged policy details Everett had laid out on video. The manila folder with a name that wasn't Vanessa's. The ledger page with financial figures that would knot together every loose end. And the notes Rosa had kept hidden in her desk drawer, dates and phone numbers going back months, waiting exactly where she said they'd be. And now Rosa's intelligence, Diane's suspicions confirmed. Milo waiting to be found. I turned the ledger page over and wrote 4 names on the back. Rosa, the deckhand, and 2 more men I hadn't called yet, but would reach by morning. Men who owed debts to the Caldwell name and who knew their way around boats, and the kind of trouble that doesn't announce itself. The first gray light crept through the salt-hazed windows. The harbor buoy bell rang in the distance, a low, steady pulse, like a heartbeat keeping time for the entire waterfront. I looked at the 5 names on the back of the ledger page. My team, my trap, my terms. I picked up my jacket and walked out into the cold morning air toward Harrington Boat Works. Walt Harrington had a boat engine torn apart on his workbench. But the moment I walked through the bay doors of Harrington Boat Works, he set down his wrench and said, "Show me." No greeting, no small talk. Walt was 71 years old, built like a dock piling, with hands that could strip a marine diesel blindfolded. He'd run the boat repair yard 300 yards south of the marina for 30 years. He'd known Everett since the boy was old enough to hold a socket wrench. And from the way he was looking at me now, steady, unsurprised, already waiting, I understood that Walt had been expecting this visit the way you expect a storm you've been watching on the horizon. I spread everything across his grease-stained workbench. The ledger page, the notes I'd made on the navigation timeline, the insurance details from Everett's videos. The name, Milo. And the folder, the one with the driver's license bearing a face I recognized and a name I didn't. Walt looked at it all for 4 minutes without speaking. He picked up each document, studied it, set it down in order. Then he walked to the back wall of the shop, unlocked a steel cabinet I'd never noticed, and pulled the doors open. Inside was marine-grade surveillance equipment, pinhole cameras, directional microphones, wireless transmitters, battery packs. The kind of hardware you'd find on a customs enforcement vessel. "I've been rigging hidden cameras on boats for 6 years," Walt said. "Anti-theft work, insurance fraud cases for commercial clients. Your son's Marina is just a bigger boat. I need ears inside that office and eyes on the fuel dock." I told him, "I can have both running by tonight." 3 old men around a workbench planning a war. We looked like a retirement ad. But what we were building had teeth. The 3rd man arrived 20 minutes later. Frank Doyle, 64, a retired maritime insurance investigator who'd spent 3 decades untangling fraud claims from Montauk to Cape Cod. He'd been Everett's godfather and my closest friend since before either of our sons could walk. He came through the bay doors carrying a manila folder thick enough to prop open a hatch. "Started pulling filings at 4 this morning," Frank said, dropping the folder on the workbench next to the surveillance equipment. "Public records, maritime registry, insurance commission databases." I didn't sleep. He opened the folder and fanned the documents across Walt's marine chart. The policy was upgraded 11 weeks before Everett disappeared. 11 weeks. In 30 years of investigating maritime claims, I have never, not once, seen an underwriter approve an elevation that fast unless someone pushed hard or paid someone off. "So we need the broker's name," I said. "I already have it." Frank tapped a highlighted line on one of the printouts. "A boutique offshore agency operating out of a Nassau P.O. box, 1 registered agent. And he owes me a favor from the Montauk zoning case 4 years ago." You ever watch a jigsaw puzzle finish itself? That's what it felt like when Frank opened that folder. Pieces I'd been carrying alone for 2 days suddenly had edges that matched. The insurance timeline locked against the navigation data. The pharmacy records dovetailed with the surveillance footage dates. Vanessa's prior identity folder connected to a pattern that stretched beyond Montauk, beyond this marina, beyond anything I'd imagined when I first heard my son's voice on that radio. Walt poured 3 cups of bitter vending machine coffee, and we sketched the counterattack on the back of a marine chart. Walt would install surveillance in the marina offices and fuel dock by nightfall. Frank would work the insurance broker and pull every filing connected to the policy elevation. I would locate Milo. The plan had a shape now. It had structure. It had people attached to it who knew how to do things, real things, mechanical things. The kind of work that doesn't care about your feelings and only respects competence. Frank was gathering his papers when he paused. He reached into the bottom of his folder and slid one more document across the chart. A photograph, printed on glossy paper, slightly grainy, the kind of image pulled from a security camera feed. It showed a woman leaving a building, the insurance broker's office, based on the address visible above the door. The photograph was date-stamped 9 days before the policy upgrade. I recognized the heels before I recognized the face. High, sharp, new. The same ones I'd heard clicking across the marina office hardwood last night. Vanessa, walking out of the broker's office with a folder under her arm, 9 days before the insurance was elevated on a policy she had no legal right to touch. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't fighting alone. The kid was trying to disappear behind a stack of diesel drums, but Frank spotted him first. We'd driven to the fuel dock at shift change 6:45 in the morning, when the overnight crew clocked out and the day crew shuffled in with coffee cups and half-closed eyes. Rosa had confirmed the name overnight. Milo Garrett, 23, a deckhand who fueled vessels and ran dock lines. He'd been on the yacht the night of the storm, and according to Vanessa's phone call, he'd been paid to forget what he saw. Milo Garrett was easy to spot. Sun-bleached hair, hollow eyes, the particular look of a young man who hasn't slept through the night in weeks. He saw us coming across the concrete apron and tried to walk the other way, moving fast between the fuel pumps with his head down. Frank cut left and stepped into his path, not aggressive, just there. A 64-year-old wall with a quiet voice. "Nobody's here to get you in trouble, son," Frank said. "We're here because you're already in it." Milo stopped. His eyes darted from Frank to me and back. His hands were stuffed in the pockets of a work jacket that smelled like diesel and salt and too many consecutive shifts. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Then why are your hands shaking?" I asked. He pulled them out of his pockets. They were shaking. He looked at them like they belonged to someone else. 23 years old and carrying a murder on his phone like a grenade, with the pin half out. We walked him around the back of the fuel shed, out of sight of the marina office windows. Frank leaned against the wall and let me do the talking. I told Milo I was Everett's father. I told him I knew he'd been on the yacht. I told him I knew he'd been paid to stay quiet. I didn't tell him how I knew. Milo's composure lasted about 90 seconds. It didn't break with tears or shouting. It broke with stillness. He stopped moving entirely, stood with his arms at his sides, and stared at the ground like a man who had been waiting for someone to come and lift the weight off his chest. "I was below," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Checking the bilge pump. The storm was building and the bilge was running every 4 minutes. I heard arguing on the deck above me. I didn't go up. I held up my phone." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone with a cracked screen. His thumb found the video file without looking. He'd opened it enough times to know exactly where it lived. "I didn't mean to record it," he said. "I just wanted to see what was happening without going up there." He turned the screen toward me. 8 seconds. I watched it 3 times. Each time, my son hit the water again. The footage was shaky, filmed through a companionway hatch at a steep upward angle. The storm-gray sky filled the top half of the frame. In the center, a broad-shouldered figure, unmistakably Cole. His medical bag strap visible across his chest, stepped forward and shoved with both hands. The body at the railing went backward and over. The splash was swallowed by the wind. Cole turned immediately, if anyone had seen. 8 seconds of footage, no audio above the storm, but the image was clear enough to put Cole away for the rest of his natural life. "Why didn't you go to the police?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Milo's jaw tightened. "Because Cole found me the next morning. He came to the fuel dock before my shift and stood right where you're standing. He said if I told anyone what I saw, he'd put me in the water next." His eyes came up to meet mine, and I believed him. Frank put a hand on Milo's shoulder. Not comfort steadiness, the gesture of a man telling another man that the ground was solid and it was safe to keep standing. I took the phone from Milo's hand and played the video a 4th time. This time I didn't watch Cole. I watched the edges of the frame. And there, in the final second, upper deck, port side, half hidden by the cabin overhang, a figure stood motionless. A woman. Watching Cole shove my son into the Atlantic. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She didn't reach for the rail or the life ring or the radio. She stood perfectly still in heels that caught the deck light for one brief frame. I knew those heels. I'd heard them clicking across the MARINA office floor 12 hours ago. 8 seconds. Enough to put Cole away for life, and enough to prove Vanessa watched it happen. How do you drug a man slowly enough that he blames the sea? Frank had the answer on his laptop screen before the coffee in Walt's shop had gone cold. He'd called in the favor with the insurance broker overnight, and what came back was a prescription trail that turned my stomach harder than any swell I'd ever sailed through. Vanessa's photograph at the broker's office had opened the door. The broker, facing questions he didn't want answered publicly, had provided Frank with the full underwriting file, including the medical disclosure forms. And buried inside those forms was a name I already knew and a medication I didn't. "Scopolamine," Frank said, turning the laptop toward me. 2 columns of dates ran down the screen, highlighted in red where they overlapped. Cole started prescribing transdermal scopolamine patches 3 months before the storm, ostensibly for seasickness. But the dosage he logged was double the therapeutic maximum. He traced the timeline with his pen. The prescription start date, the insurance policy elevation, the first midnight meeting caught on Everett's cameras. All the same week. At that dose, your son would have been dizzy, nauseated, disoriented, barely able to stand on a rolling deck, easy to push overboard. And if anyone asked, Cole would say he was treating a patient for motion sickness. Clean paperwork, clean conscience. 3 months. My son had been chemically weakened for 3 months and thought the ocean was making him sick. Every patch Cole applied was a measured step toward the railing. "He wasn't just pushed," I said. "He was softened up first." Frank nodded. "Premeditation. That's the difference between manslaughter and attempted murder." And with the video, the insurance timeline, and now the prescription records, we have a case. But we need one more thing. A confession. A recorded confession, on tape, in their own voices, admitting what they did. That afternoon, Walt came to the cottage. He brought a toolbox and worked for 2 hours with the quiet efficiency of a man who had wired hundreds of vessels for surveillance. 4 directional microphones, 2 behind the kitchen light fixtures, 1 embedded in the doorframe, 1 sewn into the lining of my jacket with threads so fine I could barely feel it against my collarbone. 3 backup transmitters in case any primary failed. Battery life of 19 hours. You wire a room to catch a confession, and suddenly every corner feels like it's listening back at you. The kitchen I'd lived in for 20 years became a stage. The table where Lorraine had served dinners became the interrogation surface. The chair where I'd sat holding a radio 2 nights ago became the witness stand. Walt tested the system from outside, walking 300 yards to his truck in the Harrington lot. Through his earpiece, he heard me breathe. Through the kitchen speaker, I heard my own breath played back tinny, amplified, unmistakable. "If someone whispers in this room," Walt said when he came back, "I'll hear it from the boatworks." The last piece arrived at 4 in the afternoon. Lieutenant Commander Reyes drove up the cottage road in an unmarked sedan, no Coast Guard markings, no uniform. He was a compact man in his 50s, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the Montauk Bluffs. His unit had standing on the case because it touched federal maritime insurance fraud tied to Everett's presumed death at sea, and he was already working the file jointly with the U.S. Marshals Service. He reviewed the video on Frank's laptop, studied the insurance timeline, and read the prescription records without expression. Then he looked at me. "The video gets me interested," he said. "The insurance gets me suspicious, but a confession gets me a warrant and a raid team on your dock in 4 minutes. So I invite them over and make them talk," I said. "You make them confess. There's a difference." Reyes leaned forward. "I can position a tactical unit offshore by sundown. 6 operators, 2 rigid hull inflatables. They'll hold at anchor until I give the signal, but that signal requires a recorded admission, something unambiguous, something a prosecutor can play for a jury. Without it, everything you've gathered is evidence for a civil case. With it, I can kick in a door." He shook my hand at the cottage door. His grip was firm and brief, the handshake of a man who was trusting another man's courage and hoping it held. Walt ran one final test. I stood at the kitchen table and spoke in a normal voice. Through the earpiece, Walt confirmed, crystal clear. I looked at the table, the lamp, the chair, the same kitchen where all of this had started with a radio that lit up at 12:17 in the morning. Everything was wired. Now I had to become the bait. I dialed Cole's number and let my voice crack on the first syllable. It wasn't hard to sound like a man falling apart. I just had to remember the chapel, the empty coffin, the radio lighting up at 12:17. The grief was real. The weakness was the performance. "Cole," I gasped. "Chest, can't breathe. I'm at the cottage, please." I hung up before he could ask questions. Then I sat down in the kitchen chair, slowed my breathing the way I'd learned from 30 years of free diving for hull inspections, and waited. He arrived in 15 minutes. I heard the car door, the crunch of shoes on the gravel path, the front door opening without a knock. He walked in carrying his leather medical bag, and I was slumped in the chair with my chin on my chest and my closed. My pulse was running at 52 beats per minute, low enough to concern, slow enough to look like a heart in trouble. Cole set his bag on the table. I heard the zipper. He pressed 2 fingers against my wrist, a check so brief it barely qualified as medicine. He held for maybe 6 seconds, then dropped my hand. 67 years old. Stress. Bad diet, he muttered, not to me, to himself. The clinical assessment of a man who wasn't here to save a patient. He stepped away from the table. I heard his phone slide out of his pocket. The screen lit up behind my closed eyelids, a faint glow that moved as he turned his back to me. Lying still while your son's would-be killer takes your pulse, that's not acting. That's fishing with your own heartbeat as the lure. "It's me," Cole said. His voice dropped to the register people use when they think no one conscious is listening. The old man just collapsed. Chest pains. Barely responsive. This might solve our problem without lifting a finger. Silence while Vanessa spoke on the other end. "No, I haven't done anything. He looks like he's going on his own. Stress cardiomyopathy maybe. Could be the grief finally caught up with him." A pause. "Yes, that would be convenient. The Marina deal closes cleaner if he's not around to contest the power of attorney." Another pause. Longer this time. "And if he doesn't go on his own," Cole's voice shifted lower, more careful. The voice of a man testing the weight of a decision. "We could help him along." Same approach. It worked before. Nobody questioned the mother. Help him along. He said it the way you'd talk about putting down a dog. The same compound that had killed Lorraine. The same slow, invisible method. Applied to me. In my own kitchen. While I sat in the chair where my wife used to read. The Marina's ours once the old man's out of the picture. Cole continued. Everett was the easy part. This one's been harder to put down. But he's right here. Vanessa. And he's not getting up. I opened my eyes. Cole was standing 4 feet away, phone pressed to his ear, his back half turned. He saw the movement in his peripheral vision, just a flicker, just a shift in the shape slumped in the chair. He turned. The blood left his face in stages. First the cheeks, then the forehead, then the lips. It was like watching a tide go out. "Keep talking, Cole," I said. My voice was steady, the steadiest it had been in 3 days. Walt's been recording every word. His mouth opened. Nothing came out for 2 full seconds. You were awake the whole time. The phone slipped from his hand and clattered on the kitchen floor. He stared at me the way a man stares at a machine he thought was broken that has suddenly turned on and started moving toward him. His eyes went to the door. His legs followed half a second later. He knocked the chair over, scrambling for the exit. I heard his shoes hit the gravel, the car door slam, the engine fire, and then tires spraying stones across the cottage path as he reversed out of the drive like a man fleeing a burning building. I didn't move to stop him. I didn't need to. The kitchen speaker crackled. Walt's voice came through from 300 yards away, calm and precise as always. Got every word. Crystal clear. I sat in the kitchen chair and listened to the silence Cole had left behind. His phone was still on my floor, the call still connected. I could hear faint road noise through the speaker he was driving, but the other end of that call was still open. Vanessa had heard everything. Cole's confession, my voice, the word recording. And Cole was only half the equation. 2 hours after Cole fled my cottage with his confession still ringing off the walls, headlights again, but this time 2 cars pulled into the drive. I watched from behind the kitchen curtain as Vanessa stepped out of the first umbrella snapping open against the rain, and Cole climbed from the second. He moved like a man walking to his own sentencing. She moved like a woman who had done this before. I had 43 minutes to prepare after Cole ran. Walt confirmed the microphones were still recording. Rosa called to say Vanessa had left the Marina house carrying a wicker basket, and I had swallowed the activated charcoal paste that now lined my stomach like wet cement. And the only thing standing between me and whatever they were bringing through my door. The doorbell rang. I shuffled to answer it, shoulders rounded, hands trembling the way a 67-year-old man's hands should tremble after a cardiac scare. "We heard you had a scare this afternoon," Vanessa said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. Rain dripped from her coat onto the floorboards. She set the basket on my kitchen counter and unpacked thermos of soup, sourdough, and a bottle of tawny port wine with a wax seal. Cole told me everything. I thought some port might settle your nerves. Cole stood by the door, coat still on, eyes on the baseboard. He would not look at me. "That's kind of you," I said. I didn't think anyone cared about the old man anymore. Vanessa found my kitchen cups without asking. She already knew this house, had mapped it the way she mapped everything she intended to take. She uncorked the port. Sweet grape and oak filled the room, and beneath it, something my body recognized before my mind could name it. A faint chemical sharpness that made the charcoal in my gut feel like armor. She poured with steady hands, not a tremor. She filled my cup 3/4 full, then poured one for herself, but I watched her fingers. She lifted hers to her lips and tilted. But the wine never touched her mouth. The rim stayed dry. You ever drink something you know is poison? Your throat closes before your brain can override the fear? Every nerve fires backward, screaming at your muscles to reject what your hand is lifting. I had rewired fuel lines in hurricane winds. None of that compared to raising that cup. "Drink it warm," Vanessa said. "It's better for the heart." I held her gaze, pale green eyes, steady as surgical lamps, and drank. The port rolled heavy and sweet, with a phantom bitterness underneath that I knew was real because the lab report from the lighthouse had named it. The same compound that had tripled in my wife's bloodstream. The charcoal caught it. I felt nothing but warmth. I set the cup down, fingers loose. Cole watched me like a man watching a fuse burn. 90 seconds. I counted each one like a man underwater measuring the air left in his lungs. At 30, Vanessa sat back. At 60, Cole's shoulders dropped. At 90, she reached for the soup thermos the way someone tidies up after a task is complete. I let my hand go slack. The cup tipped, rolled off the edge, and shattered on the blue kitchen tile. I slumped forward, forehead hitting wood, right knuckles landing in porcelain shards. Cold tile bit into my skin. I did flinch. "How long until is it working?" Cole whispered. "Give it a minute," Vanessa said. She had not moved from her chair. Same compound, same result as Lorraine, cardiac glycoside untraceable post-mortem. There it was. My wife's name in her mouth, wrapped in clinical calm, delivered over my body like a shipping label. "Check his pulse," Cole hissed. "You're the doctor. You check it." Cole's fingers pressed against my neck cold. Shaking, searching for the heartbeat that was right there, steady and strong, hidden beneath the slow breathing I had practiced for hours. He pulled back. "Nothing," he said. "We need to get him to the water before morning." I lay slumped over the table, porcelain shards beneath my hand, listening to them plan my disposal the way they had planned everything else efficiently, without grief, as if I were cargo. Then Vanessa said the words that changed everything. "Same thing we used on Lorraine. Now we just need the boat." Every microphone in the room was live. Vanessa laughed, a low, satisfied sound, like a woman closing a deal she had been working on for years. She leaned back in her chair and I heard the creak of old wood, the shift of her weight into comfort, the laugh of someone who believed she had won. I lay with my forehead pressed to the table, porcelain dust grinding into my knuckles, breathing so shallow my chest barely moved. The spilled port pooled near my elbow, sweet and sharp against the tile. Every microphone Walt had threaded through this cottage was drinking in the silence between their words. Then Vanessa started talking. "Lorraine was the test run," she said, and her voice carried the casual weight of someone reviewing a recipe. "Same compound, slower dose." I adjusted her capsules over 6 weeks, a little more each refill. Everyone blamed her heart. The coroner never even ran a secondary tox screen. She paused. I heard her nails tap the table. "After that, I knew we could do it to anyone. My wife, the woman who taught me how to tie a cleat hitch when we were 19, dead because Vanessa needed to rehearse. Cole spoke next, his voice thin and rushing, the way confessions sound when the dam finally cracks. I pushed him clean over the rail. The patches had him so dizzy he barely fought. 8 seconds in the water and the storm did the rest. I counted. 8 seconds. 8 seconds. My son in black water, drugged and drowning, while this man counted the time it took. And the old man? Cole asked. I felt his shadow move across me. How long before we move him? After midnight, Vanessa said. We take the service skiff, weight the body, drop him past the breakwater. The tide's outgoing. By morning he's in the shipping channel. Lorraine. They killed Lorraine. Not a weak heart, not age, not grief. A rehearsal. My wife's death was a dress rehearsal for murdering my son, and now they sat at my kitchen table planning to dump me in the harbor like bilge. The marina, the insurance, the cottage. Vanessa continued, and I heard her counting assets the way other people count blessings. 13.8 million total. And all it cost was patience and a little chemistry. Cole exhaled relief. Exhaustion, something animal. So it's done. It's done. The rain drummed the roof. Port wine dripped off the table edge in a slow, steady rhythm. I lay perfectly still, tasting charcoal grit and vindication on my teeth. And I let them believe it. I let them sit in the warm glow of their completed crime for 30 more seconds. Because I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them certain. The sirens came in like the tide, distant, then sudden, then everywhere, filling every crack in the room. Red and blue lights strobed through the rain-streaked windows and painted the kitchen walls in pulsing color. Vanessa's chair scraped back. What is that? Cole's voice pitched high. Boots hit the gravel outside. Not one pair, many. The sound of organized weight moving fast, diesel engines idling, radio static cutting through the rain. The front door exploded inward. The frame splintered and cold air rushed through the gap, carrying the smell of rain and exhaust. Reyes came through first, sidearm drawn, tactical vest slick with water. Coast Guard, nobody moves! 2 officers drove Cole face down onto the kitchen floor. His cheek hit the tile 6 inches from the spilled port. A boot pressed between his shoulder blades, and he made a sound I had never heard from a grown man, high. Broken. The whimper of someone who understands that the rest of his life just changed. Vanessa did not run. She stood frozen beside the table, one hand still resting on the back of her chair, staring at the tactical officers as if the scene refused to assemble into meaning. I opened my eyes. I lifted my head from the table slowly, porcelain fragments sliding off my forearm and catching the strobe light as they fell. I placed both palms flat on the wood. I stood. Vanessa's face drained. Not red to white, it went gray, the color of harbor fog, the color of something dying from the inside. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. You can't, she managed. You drank it. You drank the whole cup. I'm a mechanic, Vanessa, I said. I know how to find every broken part. Her legs gave out. She dropped to her knees on the kitchen tile right next to the shattered cup, staring up at me like I was something risen from the harbor floor. Cole was face down with a boot on his spine, whimpering into the tile. Reyes holstered his weapon, looked at me across the wrecked kitchen, and said quietly, "We need to talk about your son." Before Reyes could finish his sentence, Vanessa moved. She shoulder-checked a young officer into the doorframe and sprinted through the shattered front door into the rain. Her heels hit the gravel hard, and then she was gone. A dark shape cutting across the yard toward the marina docks, coat flying behind her like a sail torn loose. Reyes barked into his radio, but did not chase. He watched her go with the calm of a man who already knew what was coming. Cole lay cuffed on my kitchen floor, cheek pressed to the tile where the port wine had pooled, whimpering something about a lawyer. I stepped onto the porch. Rain hit my face, and I let it. From the cottage, I could see the marina's lower dock, and I watched Vanessa reach a 30-foot speedboat tied at the far slip. She cast off the stern line with one pull. She knew boats had always known boats, and that knowledge had never been innocent. The engine caught and roared. White wake exploded behind the hull as she gunned it straight into the black harbor. For 30 seconds, it looked like she would make open water. The speedboat's running lights shrank toward the harbor mouth, cutting through rain and chop. And I felt something cold settle behind my ribs, the possibility that, after everything, she would simply disappear into the Atlantic dark the way she had made my son disappear. Then the boat turned. Not sharply, not the way a person steers. It curved a slow, wide mechanical arc, as if the helm had locked onto a heading no human hand had set. The speedboat traced a perfect crescent across the harbor like a compass needle finding north. Except north was the Coast Guard station dock, lit up blue and white at the far end of the breakwater. The speedboat traced its arc across the harbor like a homing pigeon, except this pigeon was delivering its passenger straight to a cell. Vanessa's scream carried across the water, thin and furious. The controls, someone's locked the controls. She fought the helm. I could see her silhouette thrashing behind the windscreen, hauling the wheel left and right. But the boat held its arc with patient electronic precision. The same navigation system that had guided Everett's vessel into a storm now guided Vanessa's stolen speedboat into federal hands. Reyes lifted his radio. "Stand down, pursuit. The boat's coming to us." The speedboat kissed the Coast Guard dock with a gentle bump. 2 officers were already waiting, lines in hand. One of them leaned down as Vanessa stood frozen at the helm, hands still locked on the wheel that no longer obeyed her. "Ma'am, you might want to cut the engine," he said. "You're about to tie up at a federal dock." They led her off in cuffs. She did not scream again. She walked with the stiff precision of someone whose body has accepted what her mind refuses to process. I watched from the cottage porch until the dock lights swallowed her, and she was gone not into the ocean, not into freedom, but into the system she had spent years manipulating from the outside. 2 days, 48 hours of believing my son was at the bottom of the Atlantic, of holding his empty coffin in my mind like a stone I could not set down. I gripped the doorframe because my legs had started to shake and I was not ready to fall. Not yet. Not until new. The cottage was quiet now. Cole was gone, loaded into a vehicle. Reyes had stepped out to coordinate. I stood alone in the doorway, with rain misting through the open frame and salt air filling the wrecked kitchen. I did not know what to do with my hands. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered because I had stopped being afraid of unknown numbers 3 days ago. "Dad." The voice was hoarse, cracked at the edges, but I would have known it in a hurricane, in a crowd of 10,000 at the bottom of the sea. "It's me. It's over." My knees buckled. I caught myself on the doorframe, wood rough under my knuckles. And I pressed the phone against my ear so hard it hurt because I was afraid his voice would vanish if I loosened my grip. "Where are you?" "Close enough," Everett said. "I steered that boat myself. Dad, remotely. I've been watching since the lighthouse." A pause. His breath shook. "I'll explain everything. But first, I need you to know I'm alive and I'm coming home." My son was alive. And the first tear I had allowed myself finally fell salt on my lips, indistinguishable from the rain. "Everett, the boat. How did you—" He cut me off. "I wasn't the only one they tried to kill. Dad, I need to tell you about Vanessa's real name and what she did in Chesapeake Bay 3 years ago. How many husbands had Vanessa Lockwood buried at sea before she came to Montauk?" That question sat in my chest like an anchor chain as I walked into the Coast Guard station at dawn. Everett's voice still echoing in my phone, his promise still warm against my ear. The rain had stopped. Morning sun poured through the station windows and cast long shadows across the linoleum. And for the first time in 4 days, light did not feel like an accusation. Milo was sitting on a metal bench inside, flanked by 2 men in plain clothes who had Federal written in their posture. The kid looked different. His hands were still resting flat on his knees, and his eyes tracked me when I came through the door without the flinch I had seen every other time. Reyes stood at the desk with a clipboard. "Federal marshals will have him relocated by tonight," Reyes said. "Cole can't touch him. Nobody can." I crossed the room and extended my hand. Milo took it firm this time, no tremor. His grip had the strength of someone who had finally set down a weight he had been carrying too long. "You held on to that video when a grown man would have deleted it," I said. "That took more courage than you know." Milo's jaw tightened. He looked at the floor, then back at me. "I just couldn't sleep anymore, Mr. Caldwell. Not with what I saw. A 23-year-old kid with a cracked phone screen. That is who broke this case. Not detectives, not attorneys, not surveillance equipment worth thousands. A deckhand who filmed 8 seconds of horror because his conscience would not let him look away, and who held onto it for weeks because deleting it felt worse than the fear." The marshals stood. Milo rose with them. He shook my hand once more and said, "Tell your son I'm sorry I didn't come forward sooner." "You came forward exactly when it mattered," I said. They led him out through the side door into the morning air. I watched through the window as a dark sedan pulled away, carrying the kid toward a new name, a new city, a life scrubbed clean of everything that had happened on these docks. His quiet thank you to the marshal holding the door was the last thing I heard before the sedan turned the corner. I poured myself a cup of station coffee. Bitter, burnt, the kind that has been on the burner since before sunrise. It tasted like the best thing I had ever put in my mouth, because it was not port wine and it was not poison. Frank arrived 20 minutes later carrying a federal case file thick enough to wedge a door open. He dropped it on the metal desk and the slap echoed off the cinderblock walls. The smell of photocopier toner rose from the pages. "Her real name is on a federal watch list," Frank said. He opened the file and turned it to face me. A photograph, Vanessa, 3 years younger, darker hair, different last name, same pale green eyes. Chesapeake Bay, 2020, husband owned a charter fleet. Vanished in a squall. Insurance paid out $2.6 million. The Coast Guard ruled it accidental. He tapped the next page, a toxicology report with highlighted lines. Belated review last year found trace amounts of the same cardiac compound. Case went cold because the primary witness recanted. The same compound, the same method, a husband who owned boats, a storm that provided cover, an insurance payout that funded the next chapter of her life. She had refined the technique and brought it to Montauk, scaling up from a charter fleet to a marina worth 6 times as much. $2.6 million in Chesapeake, nearly $14 million here. She was not just repeating, she was expanding. With the confession tape, the video evidence, and now a linked cold case, Reyes said from behind his desk. Prosecution is projecting life without parole. For both of them. Life. The word hung in the station air alongside the radio chatter and the coffee smell and the clean salt breeze drifting through the propped open door. Life for Vanessa. Life for Cole. And life, real, breathing, continuing life for my son. She'd done this before, I said, and if not for one old radio, she would have done it again. Reyes closed the file. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen from him before, something close to respect, tempered by exhaustion. "Your son wants to see you," he said. "He's at the Montauk Lighthouse. Said you'd know why." I stood, and for the first time in 4 days, my knees did not ache. The lighthouse was where I had taught Everett to tie his first bowline at age 7. I picked up my jacket, nodded to Frank, and walked out into the morning. My son was standing at the end of Walt's dock, and for 3 full seconds I forgot how to tie off a boat I had been mooring for 40 years. The skiff bumped the pilings, and I just sat there, rope in my hands, staring at the shape of him against the morning water. Thinner than I remembered, sun-darkened, with a scar above his left eye that had not been there before, but standing, breathing, alive in a way that made the whole harbor look different. Everett caught the bow line and cleated it without a word. The knot was perfect, a cleat hitch, the same one his mother taught us both when we were too young to know what we were learning. He offered his hand to help me onto the dock, and when I took it, I held on longer than the step required. He let me. Walt was inside the shop, already setting out tools on the long workbench like he had known we were coming. A marine diesel sat in pieces on the bench cylinder head. Valve springs, gaskets laid out in ordered rows. Walt poured 2 cups of black coffee, set them at the end of the bench, and disappeared into the back office without a word. The man understood silence better than anyone I had ever known. Everett picked up a wrench. I picked up another. We stood side by side over the engine block, the way we had stood over 100 engines before, shoulders almost touching. Hands finding the same rhythm they had found since he was 14, and I first let him hold a torque wrench. We did not speak for 20 minutes. 20 minutes of socket wrenches clicking and oil-stained hands and engine parts clinking against the metal bench. It was the best conversation I had had in years. The cold engine block warmed under my palms. Grease and WD-40 filled the shop, and beneath it, the salt air drifted through the open bay doors. And I breathed all of it in because every smell meant I was here, and he was here, and neither of us was at the bottom of the Atlantic. "Pass me the 3/4 socket," Everett said, his first words in the shop. "You always did strip the threads when you used the 1/2 inch, I said. He almost smiled. Not quite the scar pulled at his brow, but close enough. "I thought I lost you," I said. The words came out quieter than I intended. Everett set the wrench down. He looked at the engine. Not at me, the way men look at things when the feelings are too large for the room. "You almost did," he said. "But you built something they couldn't sink." Walt's voice came from across the shop, low and gentle. "Engine's not going anywhere, boys. Take your time. You spend your whole life building things, boats, businesses, families. Then one night you learn which ones float and which ones sink. I had lost the Marina. I had lost Lorraine. I had nearly lost my son. But the things I built with my hands, the alliances, the evidence, the trap, those held. And the man standing next to me, turning a wrench with the same hands that had steered a speedboat into federal custody by remote, was proof that some things survive the storm. At sunset, the shop door opened and Rosa walked in carrying a casserole dish, followed by Frank with a 6-pack and Milo with the uncertain step of someone who was not sure he belonged. I waved the kid over. He belonged. The workbench where we had planned the counterattack now held coffee cups, paper plates, and Rosa's laugh breaking through the quiet like harbor bells. Frank leaned against the bay door and told a story about a case he had lost in '89. And for a moment, the shop sounded like any shop on any October evening, ordinary, unhurried, safe. I reached into my bag and pulled out the radio. Scratched metal casing, cracked antenna, the faint ozone smell of old circuits. I set it on the shelf above the workbench where it caught the last copper light of the October sun. Rosa tilted her head. "That ugly thing you kept..." It told me the truth when nothing else would. Everett looked at the radio, then at me. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. "I bought it at a gas station for $12. Cheapest thing I ever gave you." I put my hand on his shoulder. The shop smelled like engine grease and second chances. 6 people who had nearly been broken stood together in a room built for fixing things, and the sun was going down, and nobody was afraid of the dark. Sometimes the cheapest gift is the only one that tells the truth. And to you listening to my story, remember this: I spent 40 years fixing engines and thinking that was enough to hold a family together. I trusted the wrong people with the ones I loved most. I ignored the signs because it was easier to believe the best in someone than to face what they were capable of. Don't make my mistake. Don't wait until the coffin is empty to start asking questions. Pay attention to the people closest to your family. Because not everyone who smiles at your table has your best interests at heart. This was never supposed to be a revenge story. I didn't set out for revenge, I set out for the truth. And the truth led me to places I never wanted to go. But I believe God carried me through those 4 days for a reason. Not so I could destroy anyone, but so I could save what was left of my family. The real lesson in any revenge story isn't about getting even. It's about finding out what you're willing to fight for when everything has been stripped away. For me, it was my son. It was the memory of my wife. It was the truth she deserved, even after she was gone. If you take one thing from this revenge story, let it be this. The people who try to break you don't get to decide how your story ends. You do. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my position? Would you have drunk that cup? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Some details in this story were fictionalized for storytelling and reflection. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental. What matters most is the message it carries.